Okay, at this point, let's go ahead and generate the script necessary for the player. So let's go ahead and select player, and then in the inspector panel down at the bottom you'll see add component. So we'll click on add component and go all the way down to the bottom and you'll see new script. Let's click on new script and give it the following name. We're going to call this player controller and press enter so that it can create that particular script. So over here it says player controller. I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy, and actually I don't want to edit the script. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. Sorry. So I'll click on edit script. That's going to open up Visual Studio, and I will take the Visual Studio because I'm on a Macintosh. I'm going to take that Visual Studio and move it to another screen. So let me wait for it to completely establish here, which is still doing. Loading. And here it is. So I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to drag it to another page like this. That way I can just simply toggle back and forth like this. And we'll start coding over here. All right, so I don't need the start function, so I'm going to get rid of that. And let me just remind you, I'm going to get rid of the update function. As you can see here, the description says that update is called once per frame. But there is also another function that I want to talk to you about, and it's called fixed update. And fixed update is called just before any physics calculations. So this is where our physics code goes. So just before any physics calculations are performed, we call fixed update to make sure that those calculations are performed. Then we can go ahead and update the screen. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of these lines of code, and I will type void fixed update. In fact, it already pops up. This function is called every fixed frame rate frame if the mono behavior is enabled. Okay, so let me go ahead and double click on this guy, and it automatically comes up with this private keyword. If I just typed in void fixed update and open and close parens, and then wow, it looks like it just automatically puts the private keyword. Okay, that's fine. All that this means is that anyone who is using this class, any other class or any other method, does not have access to this. Only methods within this class are allowed to see this. It's just kind of like, okay, is this a public bathroom or is this a private bathroom? Well, anybody coming to the beach is going to go to the public bathroom. You can't come inside of my house to use a private bathroom because it's private, right? So private means that we're going to be able to hide stuff here. All right, so in this case, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have the ability to control the UFO, because that's what this code is all about, controlling this guy. I want to be able to control the UFO or my player using the arrow keys on my keyboard. So what we'll do is we'll create a float value that we're going to call move horizontal, and this is going to be the value based on the key presses left and right, or the arrows. So we type in input. Actually, let me slow this down. Input. Okay, so what does this say? Okay, interface into the input system, which specifically is going to be our keyboard. Dot, and then notice that get access over here. It says returns the value of the virtual access identified by access name. Fancy wording for just simply saying that we want to get the keyboard behavior. And so within parens, you're going to type in the string horizontal. Make sure you type it exactly like that. Go ahead and put a semicolon after this. So now I have the ability to gain the values based on my left and right keyboard arrow presses. All right, so we're also going to create a move vertical variable. And again, that's going to be based on the input.getAccess. And this time we're going to type in the word vertical. Don't forget your semicolon at the very end. These two variables are going to be used to determine what the values are based on the key presses of the up, down, left, right arrow keys on your keyboard. So the next thing to consider is I want to create a reference here in my script to the player. Now, the code that we're typing here belongs to the player controller script, which, as you can see here, the player controller script is a component of our player, right? Player selected, player selected. This guy belongs to player. What I need to do is I need to say, okay, this rigid 2D body, I need to give it a name here. So I know over here it's simply called rigid 2D body. The name of this thing is called player, but I need to somehow refer to it here in code. So what I'll do is at the very top, over here, let me press enter a couple of times. I'll type in private rigid body 2D, and then RB for rigid body, and then 2D. I could give this thing any name. I'm going to call it RB2D. This is what I want to be referring to this guy right here. Here, if I select this, right, if I select the player, that's this guy right here. We're calling it player here in this game or scene view, but in the code, I want to call it RB2D. So how do I take this and make it apply as a reference to this guy? So the way that we do that is we're going to use our start function. Maybe I shouldn't have deleted that, huh? Okay, so start. And the way that start works out is that every time your program starts, this is the first function that it's going to execute. So let me get rid of this and type in RB2D. And what I need to do is as soon as you start your program, I want you to get a specific component. What component do I want you to get? I want you to get a rigid body 2D. Whatever rigid body 2D that is available for this player controller. Well, wait a minute. This player controller belongs to this guy. So really, the only thing to grab is this rigid body 2D that we created. In other words, get this. Here, I'm referring to this as player. Here, I'm referring to that UFO as RB2D. So this is in essence establishing like an internal reference. This is what we'll call that disk, right? This disk right here, the UFO. This is what we'll call the disk in code, but back over here in Unity, we're referring to it as player. So let's make sure to save our work before I continue. Click Save. The next thing to do is to click over here inside of the fixed update function, and I'm going to create a vector2 variable called movement. A vector2 is just something that contains x and y axis values, and we're going to create a variable called movement that will contain that. And so what is that going to be based on? That's going to be based on the move horizontal and move vertical values, and you know what these are. These capture the values based on the arrow keys that you're pressing left, right, up, and down on your keyboard. So we'll say new vector2 parens, and already we can see that there's two different flavors. One of those flavors is to give me an x-axis and a y-axis, x and y-axis value. Well, in terms of the x-axis, that's going to be based on move horizontal, comma, and then I need a y-axis value. That's going to be based on move vertical. Put a semicolon at the very end. So this movement contains the x and y-axis values that were based on your key presses, your arrow key presses. I want that to be applied to my UFO. And the way that I'm going to do that is here I'm referring to that UFO, my player, as RB2D. That's what this is. At the beginning of the program, get that rigid body. Well, this is my rigid body in terms of what's related to this code here. So what I'll do is I'll say that rigid body that I'm referring to, I want to add a force to it. So add force, and you can see over here what the description says. I need to give this thing a 2D, a vector 2D. Well, I've got that over here. That's called movement. So we'll say add force, parens, and the argument that I'm going to give to it is movement. And again, don't forget the semicolon. So what this does is it applies a force based on your keyboard presses, your arrow keyboard presses, to our rigid body. Let's go ahead and save our work. Save. And then I'm going to go back over here to Unity and run the program, and let's see what happens. So give it a couple seconds. And oh, it just falls off the screen. Now, the reason why it falls off the screen is because it still has a gravitational component to it. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I click player, and if I look over here, notice that the gravity scale is set to 1. And I don't want there to be any gravity. So what I'll do is I'll just simply say 0, and then I'll run the game again. And let's see what happens. Okay, so now it's not moving. Perfect. Gravity isn't pulling it down. If I press the down arrow key, well, we see a little bit of movement. I'm going to let go right now. I'm going to press the up arrow key, and so it has to counteract that force that was applied to the downward force. I'm going to press the right arrow key, let go, and then I'm going to press the left arrow key. Now I'm going to press left and down at the same time. So as you can see here, I'm applying forces to the disk, and now I'm off the game. So I'm off the board. We don't want that to happen. But as you can see, let me stop the game. As you can see, the code has been entered such that, based on those arrow key presses, we are applying a force to our disk. All right, one of the things that I've noticed is that the disk, the UFO, is moving very, very slow based on the keyboard presses. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a some sort of a modifier, some sort of a variable, a multiplier that is going to allow me to increase the speed. And I think what I'll do is I'll make it so that there's a public reference that appears over here, and the user can type in a number, 1, 5, 10, whatever, that acts as a multiplier to increase the sensitivity or increase the speed based on my arrow presses, my arrow keyboard presses. So let me switch back over here to the code, and let's go ahead and move to the top, and I'm going to create a public reference because I want that to appear on Unity, which I'll show you in just a moment. And I'll type in float, and then I'll type speed. All right, let me save my work. And then I'm going to switch back over here to Unity. And in just a moment, you'll see over here that that variable will pop up. So there it is. There's speed. That is my public reference that I just created. So in other words, when the user types in a number over here, we're going to use that as a multiplier such that when I press my arrow keys, I'm going to make them either a little bit more sensitive or maybe not so sensitive based on what I want. So let's go back over here and make it so that it applies to our disk, the speed multiplier that is, that it applies to our disk movement. Okay, place your cursor right over here next to rb2d.addForce movement. I'm going to use that multiplier that I've just created called speed to multiply this movement by however much the user wants. The user is going to be able to determine that over here, and we are just making it so that that acts as a multiplier times movement. Okay, so let me go ahead and save my code. And let's switch back over here and type in a ridiculously large number like 1,000, say for example. So let me restart the game. And let me press down on an arrow, and that thing just shoots off the screen. Obviously, that's too much. So let me stop the game. Let's go over here and type in 10 for our speed, enter, and start the game. Okay, now I'm going to press the up, down, left, right arrows, and that's better. So it looks, I mean, it's still going off the board. I have to control that. But in terms of moving this thing around, I'm using the arrows. I'm pressing 2 of them at the same time even, and this thing's moving around a lot faster than it was before. So the next problem, as you can see here, is that this thing goes off the board. I have absolutely no idea, even though this thing's moving, as you can see, I have no idea where it is on the screen. All right, so I need to stop this thing from going off the screen. So let's stop the game. Okay, so here's the idea. In order to make the UFO not go off the screen, what I'm going to have to do is to add a collider to this UFO player, and then I'm also going to have to add walls, which I'll show you in just a moment. Let me center this like this. I'm going to have to add walls that the UFO, when it makes contact with, when the collider makes contact with the walls, it's not going to go off the screen. It's simply going to bounce against those walls. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to establish a collider for my player. So first of all, I'll select player, and I'm going to zoom in. I'm just using my trackpad on my keyboard, And since this guy is selected, I can hold down a button on my trackpad and then move this thing around. If you have a mouse, you do the same thing. Just click and hold down the left mouse button to move this around. And then we'll see Add Component, right? And of course, the player selected. And Physics 2D. And let's select the Circle Collider. And the reason why I'm selecting the Circle Collider is because obviously you can see the circular shape of our player. So I'll select Circle Collider. Now, it's probably difficult to see on this video lesson based on the the quality that you're looking at it on YouTube, but there is a green line. That's what my hand cursor right now is indicating. There is a green circle, very small green circle on your screen. You'll probably see it a lot better than here. So if I zoom in really, really close, you can see part of that green circle. Let me zoom out. And what I want to do is I want that green circle to be a little bit tighter. I want it to hug our UFO object a little bit better. So here's that component, the circle collider that I've just created. And over here I see a radius value. When I hover my mouse pointer right here, you can see that there are arrows. So I'm just simply going to, if you have a mouse, you'll just click, hold down, drag this to the left, drag this to the right. What I'm going to do is I have 3-finger control on my trackpad, and as you can see, if I'm moving this to the left and to the right, the circle, the green circle, is increasing in radius or decreasing in radius. So what I want it to do is I want it to be just outside the UFO. And so let's see what that looks like here. You can see the green line right here, barely. And that's not bad. I think I can get it to be just a little tighter. So let's see if I hover over here and maybe just a little bit tighter. That's too much. Right there is fine. Okay, so it's just a little tiny overlap from the UFO, but I had to really zoom in to be able to get that. Let's do that. That's fine. Now that we've established a collider, we're ready to now go ahead and set up barriers for the outside of our game.